Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell. In addition to podcasting, I'm a speaker and an author. I'm a strategy and fundraising consultant, and I'm a leadership and mastermind coach. Speaking of which, if you're interested in joining other talented and motivated nonprofit leaders, check out our mastermind page on the pattonmcdowell.com website. We're taking applications right now for the fall cohort. Thanks as always for listening, and I know you're going to enjoy this fantastic conversation with Mazarine Treyz. She is a prolific producer of nonprofit content, especially on fundraising and career development topics. You can find her at MazarineTreyz.com, AskingForMore.com, or WildWomanFundraising.com, all of which will be linked in the show notes. Mazarine and I discussed a topic that is front and center for both of us, and that is transitions in the nonprofit sector. And let's face it, this could be a great time for you if you are a candidate pondering a move, but it could also be a bad time for you if you are a leader trying to retain talent and not doing the right things. Well, Mazarine and I discuss multiple transitions that might affect you personally or your organization, whether you're an emerging leader, you're new to the field, maybe you're a lateral entry hoping to jump from for-profit to nonprofit. Maybe you're a nonprofit professional trying to and aspire to be an executive director. Or finally, maybe you're an executive director thinking about jumping out of the field and becoming a consultant. Wherever you fall on the transition continuum, Mazarine has got you covered. Lots of reasons to check out the show notes. This is episode number 166. Just go to the new podcast page at patmcdowell.com, and you'll find all of the resources Mazarine and I discuss, as well as more information that she's doing through her consulting and training program, primarily at MazarineTreyz.com, but there are other links that you'll see in the show notes as well as information on the upcoming Nonprofit Consultant Conference coming up August 25th and 26th in 2022. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mazarine Treyz. Mazarine, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you so much for having me, Pat, and I'm so excited to talk with you.
Well, you've got a lot of good things going on in your world, and you have talked and written and presented about topics that are so relevant to nonprofit leaders everywhere. Those that are currently leaders thinking about their next move, those that maybe are thinking about getting into our sector, all of which you certainly have some great things to consider. And let me start with that question, because you've worked with a lot of leaders who are pondering their career advancement. Is there a particular challenge maybe coming out of the pandemic that you've seen for folks that are debating a move in general? What would be your response to that?
Well, there is a challenge, and that is it's harder to meet people if you're not going to networking events in person.
Right.
And a lot of times people do get their positions at nonprofits because of who they know, just like any job.
So that challenge in particular, have you seen, though, I guess, opportunities for the virtual networking, or is that still problematic, in your opinion?
Actually, no, we can certainly do virtual networking. And in fact, when I work with my clients and they're like, I want to go for this job, for example, I'm making a transition, we look at who I know who knows somebody there, or who they know who knows somebody there already. And then we see if they can have an informational interview or arrange an introduction if it's a second degree connection on LinkedIn. And so if people are listening to this and thinking about making a move or starting out in the sector, LinkedIn is your friend.
That's good. And in fact, if there's a silver lining perhaps to the pandemic, is we've gotten more adept, I think, at some of the virtual networking, right? And so there's opportunities to connect literally around the world. And so I'm glad you lift that up. And of course, we'll talk more about some of the cool networking events and conferences that you're part of, which literally will bring people together. But before we do that, tell us about your journey. Mazarine, how did you get into the work you're doing now?
So I don't know if you remember 2009, but there was like a huge crash.
Sadly, I do. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I did in 2009 was I moved to Austin, Texas, tried to find a job, couldn't find one, decided to just go into business for myself. And since that time, I've had incredible journey with my consulting business. And I've really found that I prefer consulting to working full-time in an organization, because you get to help so many different kinds of causes, and you get to really just do what you love to do instead of, you know, just a million things that the average development director has to do. So I come out of fundraising. I was working at the Urban League, and then I worked before that at a domestic violence shelter, and before that I worked at Humane Society. And I also co-founded a nonprofit. So I've done a lot of different kind of things with nonprofits, from establishing them to growing them, to, you know, board relations, to fundraising, to marketing. And through all that, I've been fortunate enough to learn from my consulting clients as well as the years have gone by. And it's been so helpful and so useful just to see like how much fundraising and nonprofit world as a whole is shifting. And I know we're going to talk about that. I don't want to anticipate your questions.
No, well, you're good at that. And but fantastic organizations for which you worked. You have been on the front lines. You've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the fundraising world. I'm guessing those experiences specifically influence the consulting work you do now. And is it fair to say that you bring that experience literally to your clients?
I do. And the wonderful thing is, when you know what you're really good at and you're allowed to focus on it, you can get even more incredible results, because you're not tied to like, oh, and then I have to do this board report, and then I have to do this grant report, and then I have to like go out to a networking meeting that I really don't feel like going to, you know, like you can just be like, hey, I'm really good at annual campaigns, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then you can just help people raise like triple, quadruple the amount they've ever raised before and enjoy it, you know?
You've had success in exactly that. I was going to ask you, while you've consulted in a variety of ways, is there a particular type of consulting you most enjoy? What really gets you excited in terms of the work you do?
I love helping women ask for more, specifically.
Yep.
And by that, I mean, not just your salary, but ask for more from the system, and ask for more from our organizations, and saying, let's address, you know, oppression. Let's address how the workplace culture here kind of sucks.
Yep.
Let's address, you know, how we all need a break, not just mothers, not just fathers, not just people caring for elders, but what if we could normalize, you know, working 4 days a week, 6 hours a day, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And of course, I notice even in your email signature, you're very sensitive to the realities and trying to help people have a better, is it fair to say, work-life balance, or what are you seeing that, particularly in women, that they're struggling with in our sector? I mean, is it just the systemic issues that are holding many of them back?
You know what? So I actually did like a whole podcast just about that particular issue with Holly Rustick and the Grant Writing and Funding podcast. So if you want to listen to that, you should definitely check it out. But in a nutshell, since the pandemic started, it's been very difficult for a lot of women around the world. The responsibilities at home have increased as kids have not been able to go to school consistently. People have needed more care, and often that falls on women's shoulders, as well as a lot of women and children aren't safe at home because of the increase in trauma for men. And for themselves. And so there's more domestic violence as well. So all of that to say, I talked with a woman who is an executive at a foundation in 2020. And she said, if my boss wasn't so accommodating, I would have quit my job. And she's like good at her job and she loves her job, but she had so many other responsibilities at home that she simply couldn't deal with the same level and pace of work that she had been working at. And I think the pandemic really is a diagnostic tool, as Arundhati Roy says. And it was really showing us these are the things that are wrong with our culture. Our healthcare system is broken. Yeah. Our, you know, racial justice is broken. Our world is on fire, you know, and we can't ignore it anymore. And so in a way, I'm glad that brought it to light, even though it's also been so devastating for all of us.
It exacerbated problems, though, that were there, weren't they? And whether we wanted to acknowledge them. Yeah, yes. Right.
They were always there. We could just shield ourselves from them with our privilege. So.
I think that's such a unique and fascinating support you can provide, particularly women in the nonprofit sector. Talk about that kind of consulting. So if I'm a woman and frankly, I'm underpaid, or I'm not in a role that's appropriate, what type of work do you do, or what does that look like when someone comes to you, and how do you help them through those kind of things?
So I've had different clients over the last couple of years. So some of them have been consulting for years, and a former executive director who moved into consulting wanted to get assistance in securing a part-time lucrative role. We managed to do that with her, and she's getting $72,000 a year for a part-time job now.
Wow.
Yeah. And another one had been grant writing for a very long time, and we helped her up her rates by 67%, and she still has a waiting list as long as your arm.
So you help
And
kind of evaluate the work they're doing, and in some cases place them or reformulate, I guess, the work they do, and maybe become an independent consultant, right?
Well, they can do that, or I helped a woman with a PhD in art history get her first fundraising job last year, and then this year she came back to me and said, okay, now I want a different one. And I said, I'd love to help you with that. And so it's really about framing what you're good at, what satisfies you, and then also what your previous experience it is, and then sort of like translate it into, so you look like the perfect candidate for this role. And I just had a nonprofit career conference in March, and at that conference there were two different recruiters that presented, one from Canada, one from the US, and they both said that people are jumping like crazy now. Like the average nonprofit fundraiser in Canada stays for 6 to 12 months at most, and in America it's 12 to 18 months. And so he said, if you make a jump now, you will get between 10 and 15% more in salary. And as we know, with the pandemic also emboldening corporations to raise rates for no reason, we've had 8% inflation in the last several months, which means that if you didn't get an 8% raise increase last year, you're getting underpaid.
Good grief.
I know,
so is
right?
Well, and what do you advise? I mean, obviously the sector is dealing with terrible kind of turnover issues, but as
Yes.
we advocate for the individual, you're saying that there are real opportunities right now. So is that kind of, how would you advise someone? Is now the time to look?
Yes, absolutely it is. Now's the time to look. You should always consider that even when you're working for someone else, you're still always working for yourself.
Right.
Because you're the one who's going to care the most about your career, and you're the one who's going to want to see yourself succeed. And I had a friend who I met at the domestic violence shelter, and I helped her get a job at the city. She stayed there for 13 years and nobody advocated for her career. And so she really was underpaid for many years. And she finally left and started consulting in 2020. And at first she was afraid to charge $75 an hour, and now she's confidently charging $350 an hour. And I just love to see it. It's really beautiful.
Getting paid what they're worth, right?
And she has so much work. She has too much work. Yeah.
Well, and I guess before someone makes the jump, it sounds like you advocate, should they first try to make sure they're getting what they deserve where they are, right? Or empowering
yes, I mean,
them
obviously, if they can
negotiate, right?
Yeah, help them negotiate, help them understand what really they want. And a lot of times, if you're socialized as a woman in this society, you're encouraged to kind of acquiesce and be a people pleaser and not really know what you want. And it can be very frustrating for other people. Like, why don't you know what you want? And I'm sure you've had this conversation, like helping people understand exactly what it is they want, and so that they can actually go out and get it.
And of course, it makes me more sensitive, Mazarine, to the leaders listening. They need to be more sensitive, right? In terms of, are they doing, I guess let me turn that into a question. What can current leaders do to help retain those talented professionals on their team? Because I think sometimes they're not paying attention. And
oh yeah,
lose them, right?
I actually had an organizational development PhD speak about that very thing at my last conference at the end of last year as well.
Yeah.
And she said that there's a way to turn the Great Resignation into the Great Attraction. And she said, first of all, start nurturing the learning of your team. And learning and development is really important in nonprofits. Specifically, you need to give them a bigger budget for mentorship, for learning, and so showing that you really want to invest in them. So there's research to back this up, and I'll tell you exactly where it comes from. So Ellen Bristol of the Bristol Strategy Group wrote a book with Linda Ledzikowski called The Leaky Bucket. And then she also wrote another one called Fundraising the Smart Way. And she has a quiz on her website that over 1,000 organizations have taken about their donor retention rates. And she said, I found from all these different organizations, the retention rates were abysmal, like 30%, 40% retention at most. But she said the people that had the highest retention, and she figured out why, was LDS, aka the Mormons. And of course, we know that religious people are more generous because they get asked every week.
Right.
But it's not just about that. Their fundraisers for the first 2 years that they are there, they're not asking them to raise any money at all. They're just training them and helping them learn how they do things there so they can go out and be an incredible fundraiser. And that's why they have such incredible retention. It's not just about how they treat their donors, it's how they treat their people. So if you can take some of the pressure off of your staff, say, let's rewrite the job description so it's exactly what you want it to be and not all the things that really annoy you and make you want to quit.
Yep.
Let people work 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, because we're still all in trauma. We're still all kind of unpacking what the last 2.5 years have really meant. And we're not out of the woods yet. People are still dying from COVID, so don't make people go to networking events that are in person. Don't make them meet with donors in person. I had a client who was a major gifts officer in the Midwest, and she said, my boss is trying to make me go back into work, even though I've been working from home this was last year, for a year. And she said, I'm just going to get another job. And she was doing great work and she raised them lots of money. And now she's making even more money and making them more money, the competitor more money at a new job. And she's much happier. She has, a health condition and she just had a baby. And so like all this stuff combined meant that unless you develop empathy and treat people like human beings instead of work robots, you are going to lose your good people. And that, according to Penelope Burke's donor-centered leadership, will lose you 117% of their salary. So you will lose over $600,000 if you have turnover year over year.
Yeah, turnover costs.
Yes.
Right.
And then if you keep your good person, you'll raise $500,000 more. That's what her study has shown.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you lifted that up. And you've already lifted up a half dozen good books. So thank you, Mazarine. I knew you'd give me more than one, and you have indeed. And I bet you will give me more. But I want to underscore several points there. One, the kind of retention strategy there around learning and development. And have you seen particular professional, I guess I would use the phrase professional development, right? Or learning and development. Have you seen are there examples that some organizations have used in particular to create an environment around learning and development? Or is it just budget? I guess that was one thing you mentioned too.
You know what? A budget is a value statement. You need to put aside at least $12,000 to mentor your people. Nice. Because what I'm seeing is some organizations that are short-sighted are hiring people that they can get away with paying $15, $20 an hour. And these people are just left adrift. And so people need mentorship, people need training. They can go to a consultant and they will provide that. The consultant has all the resources and the templates and the checklists that they need, and help them advocate for, having a better donor database or a donor database in the first place, or help them advocate for, themselves against unrealistic expectations so that everybody gets on the same page. And then you won't be driving people away if you don't even know what unrealistic expectations are, especially during a global pandemic. Now's a great time to learn what they are, and a consultant can help you do that.
Yeah, well put. And again, you've helped people in this way in many respects. And I'm just glad that you're reinforcing the point. If we're better to our people, the direct correlation to the donor retention rate, which I don't think a lot of people necessarily make that point, right? It's like we burn out the fundraiser and we just think we're going to find a new one right away. And your point is, no, take care of the fundraiser you've got, who in turn will take care of the donors, right? And everything gets better. But funny that organizations don't seem to get that.
It's just like making a friend. It's like,
right.
Do you want the person at your organization to feel good about your organization and want to make friends for you, or continue the relationships that you already have? Or do you want to make them feel bad and make them want to quit immediately and look for another job? And they can find one like that right now.
It's a market for the applicant, and I guess executive directors beware. If you're not taking the advice, Mazarine, you're offering them, they are going to lose their best people, because there are good opportunities out there right this minute. And it strikes me. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, and this is also a message for board members about your executive director.
Good point. Same thing applies.
Don't burn them out. Don't ask them to do too much. Get them to rewrite their job description so it's just what they want to do, and then maybe move to a co-leadership model, because almost every executive director I know is doing too much.
Talk about co-leadership. What do you mean, and where do you see that work?
Yeah, so if you look at the community-centric fundraising blog and podcast and things like that, You'll see examples of co-leadership models. So there's sometimes 3 different aspects of an executive director position that can be given to 3 different people. There's the HR and operations aspect, there's the fundraising aspect, there's the leadership aspect, and then they kind of tag team it between them so that no ball gets dropped. But if you're asking someone to do 3 people's jobs, which is essentially what that is, balls will get dropped, and then, boards will wring their hands and say, we just can't find good help these days. And it's just not true. It's just like one person can't be 3 people or 5 people. Like for my last fundraising job, I was the marketing manager, I was the development director, I was the major gift officer, I was the event manager,
Yeah,
I
it's
was the
impossible,
grant
isn't it?
writer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 5 jobs.
Right. And good point that boards need to recognize and understand some of the unrealistic expectations we put on our nonprofit staff. And I'm glad you're lifting up a model. In fact, I've had an episode to talk to a couple co-leaders, and you're right, that is something that more organizations might need to explore. Let me go back to, speaking of the transitions that you have guided, and this episode is about someone who's not a fundraiser transitioning into fundraising. And you mentioned some, I know you've helped many. What are the characteristics you're looking for? If I'm not a fundraiser now, but I want to be one, how do you help me?
Yeah, so what we do is we just look at your background and we say, okay, can you get some fundraising experience under your belt before you work somewhere? And so what I did when I first started out is I went to idealist.org and I looked at the new organizations and I said, hey, can I write some grants for you? And they said, sure. And before that, I was in Indonesia and I wrote my first grant for an autoclave, which
Wow.
is, like an instrument sterilizer, because I was working in mobile health clinics in Jakarta's poor slums. And so I was like, oh, hey, fundraising is a thing. Maybe I should do this. And so I started consulting actually before I had a full-time job. And then I did get full-time jobs after that, but I really got paid to learn. So that was really helpful for me to know that there's no one right way to get into it, but a lot of times people are not going to give you a chance until you have experience.
But you sought out, Mazarine, sorry to interrupt you, but you sought out new organizations who didn't have fundraising staff, in essence, volunteered.
Well, I got paid.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I offered to pay, I offered to do stuff for them for money.
Got it.
Yeah.
But you found that they were willing, they needed help.
Yes.
And so you're saying for someone who is new to the field or wants to get into fundraising, perhaps it's through the new organizations like that might give you a chance, thereby building your resume for future.
Yes. And I ran a nonprofit job club when I lived in Austin, Texas. And so I had people come in and talk to folks about how they, the chief development officer at University of Texas Ransom Center, like how did she get there?
Yep.
And she took us down her road, took us down her journey. Another person who ran like a consulting firm with multiple people working there, how did he do that? We talked with somebody who was a former executive director, what did she learn? And so all of those stories are in my blog and also on in my book, Get the Job, Your Fundraising Career Empowerment Guide. But if you are looking for a non-fundraising job, I would definitely think about career pathing. And so what that means is looking at where you've kind of started to grow your career and then think about what does the path look like to get to where I want to go and where do I want to go in this sector?
Yes.
And so on my website, on MazarineTreyz.com, you can find like a little link at the top, which is here's your free career pathing guide. And it also has networking scripts and things so you can start to understand more about what the sector is and if you want to enter it or not. And also the qualities that you'll need for each different kind of, for example, fundraising job.
Love that. And I'm going to, again, of course, encourage our listeners to check out the show notes so you can get access to all of Mazarine's resources and obviously an opportunity to connect with her. But let me ask you about another transition. Many transitional paths. How about into senior leadership? You've worked with folks, in essence, evaluating the question, I want to be an executive director. What do you think are the kind of key characteristics they need to work on, or have you worked with someone to help them become the senior leader?
I'm going to lean on the experience of the person who was the chief development officer at the Ransom Center. Okay. She said that when she started out, she had a master's in education and she was really tired of teaching. Then she moved to Mississippi and she started working with an organization for people with developmental disabilities. She sat on the board and then she became the executive director. And you would not believe, Patton, how often that happens.
From board to executive director,
yes,
maybe? Yeah.
Yes, especially in a place where, there's not as much population density.
Right.
And so she said, once you have that title, people are much more willing to see you as a leader. And so that's how she came back and started to get more and more senior roles. And so if that's the case, then in this case, I don't usually advocate volunteering, but in this case, maybe being on a board and then becoming an executive director. And also some of the worst executive directors I've ever seen have come from the board. So just know that
It's not a guarantee, right?
It's not a guarantee that you'll be good at it, but you'll certainly be seen more as a leader if you have some board service under your belt.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I do think that you're right. It's not a silver bullet. It may not work in every case, but I do think board service can help enhance our leadership skills, right? So I may work for one nonprofit, but I wonder if serving on the board of another perhaps will give us new perspectives. And I guess what you're saying is maybe in some cases it might help prepare you for senior leadership.
I do think so. You'll get to see different aspects of what different pressures the nonprofit is under and how that current executive director interacts with the board. You'll see, what like maybe a senior role would entail. And also, I mean, I would definitely interview people who have a role that you want. Just ask them on LinkedIn for a 10-minute conversation and say, what keeps you up at night?
Yep. Understand the reality of their world, right? Which helps you contemplate the same thing for yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Love that, Mazarine. And well, the final transition I want to talk about, again, one that is exciting given the conference coming up this summer, but you and I both talked to executive directors and of course senior development and others who are pondering getting into consulting. What are some of the key elements or characteristics that you think make a successful transition from nonprofit leadership into consulting?
I would say start before you quit your job. Number one.
Okay.
Do it at least a year before you quit to see if you like it.
Part-time kind of project work, maybe?
Yeah. Project work, part-time. Start building up your connections. Start, thinking about making a website, or even just pumping up your LinkedIn profile. Get all of your results that you've achieved in the last several years of your work and make sure that those are pointed up on your LinkedIn profile as well. Or when you have a website or an about.me page, put those there. People don't believe what you say about you, they believe what other people say about you. So also get those testimonials, get those recommendations from others that you've worked with in the last several years and put those on there. Are you good to work with? What have you achieved? Do they like having you on their team? Yeah. So doing that is a great first step. And that's something that just about anyone can do. Like there's no charge for using LinkedIn. And presumably if you've already had an illustrious nonprofit career, you'll be able to get those testimonials. And then from there, I would start looking at what kind of organizations would I like to work with? What is my sweet spot in terms of satisfying work? And I love helping people figure that out as well. We use the Strengths Finder, but we also use a couple of other resources like Human Design to help people really get down deep into like what they're supposed to be doing here. And that's one of my favorite things to do is help people really go into the satisfaction that comes from being fully aligned with what you do every day and not having to suffer fools.
Yes. And
like sometimes in nonprofits you have to, and
Indeed.
like other times when you're consulting, you're like, nah, I don't feel like that. I don't want to do that.
You articulate it well, and it's obviously I share your passion for consulting now 14 years in. Now, I love the work like you did with those wonderful organizations with which you worked previously, but I guess, and maybe you alluded to this earlier, the variety, is that what is most compelling for you to be in consulting?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be free. I think we all want to be free. And so, 9 to 5, who decided that was a good idea? Like who decided we'd only get 2 weeks of vacation? Who decided that our healthcare would be tied to our work? So for me, like it's actually a psychological journey, and it's a very potent one when you become a consultant, and people don't realize that, but you start to understand a sense of your own self-worth, of value, of like what really satisfies you, and then also how you held yourself back over the years because of your conditioning from childhood. And you start to really get clear on, oh, this is going to make me excited and happy. And I get to have more of that. I don't have to suffer. I don't have to be a martyr. And unfortunately, a lot of us coming out of the nonprofit sector, we do have that, oh, is it okay for me to have money? Is it okay for me to be, enjoying myself this much? Is it okay for me to only do this other thing I really like to do? And so I love helping people kind of break that spell.
Love that.
And yeah. At the nonprofit consulting conference, which is going to happen August 25th and 26th, which is a Thursday and a Friday, we are going to be talking about asking for more, We're going to be talking about how to get consulting clients through speaking gigs. We're going to be talking about how to develop passive income streams on a panel. And so it's going to be really powerful. If people do want to check that out, it's nonprofit consulting company. And it's presented by Foundant.
I'm going to lift that up in every way. And I think our mutual friend, Holly, talk about you've got some other talented people joining you on this conference, right?
Yes, Holly Rustick,
yeah.
Yes, of the Grant Writing and Funding podcast, and Amanda Pierce of Funding for Good. I hadn't worked with them before, but they are darling. And this is Holly's idea to do this podcast. I'm sorry, to do this conference. And I was like, can I help? And then she's like, yeah, let's bring in Mandy too. And so then we're all just getting to be, our fundraiser selves, getting sponsors and selling tickets and doing marketing. And it's so much more fun for me than like running a conference alone. I'm like, I never want to run a conference alone again.
Yeah, now that you've got good friends to work with. And
yeah,
a big fan of Holly's. I have been on her podcast and she has been on mine as well. So excited for you. And well, let me ask the question, because I know you get this. People are like, wow, Mazarine, that consulting sounds good, but I'm nervous. I got a family to feed. I've had at least a steady salary with my nonprofit jobs. How do you talk to somebody about those fears?
That's a reasonable fear. You should think about that.
Yep.
And that's why I encourage people to consult on the side as they have a full-time job to see, can I start to get business in the door? And another thing we'll be talking about, we'll be having networking at the conference too. We'll be talking about how to get referrals. And once you figure out your sweet spot in terms of services, think about the complementary services that go with what you do. Let's say, for example, you just like getting sponsorships. You should be talking with somebody who loves to run events, right? And maybe also an events company in town.
Natural, yeah.
Right?
Good
natural connections. Like somebody's like, gosh, we love this event, but we need more sponsors. I know a person. And suddenly you're getting more business than you want to do with. The person that I helped leave her job this year, and she'd been consulting for the last 2 years, she was really, really scared to leave her job. Yep. And she was putting it off, even though it was getting worse and worse and worse for her. And finally, she just had to say, wow, I think I'm really going to be good. Like, even if one of these clients goes away, I have like 3 other people waiting, and it's not all COVID money that she's using. There's like other money coming in. And so I think that it's okay to say I'm not ready. And it's also okay to say, like, I support you in whatever decision you make. And I think you are ready,
That's great. And it clearly, your consulting allows you to use your great skill of encouragement.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, unfair to try to summarize all of the wonderful words of wisdom you've shared in this episode, but is there some final advice you might offer someone who is at that precipice of transition? What do you tell them? How would you encourage them even further?
I would say, know yourself and accept yourself. You can be ambitious and you can also be afraid, and both of those things can be true at the same time.
Love it. And love your advice too, by the way, of consulting doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, right? That you know yourself, you have the capacity perhaps to take on a little bit more. And that's the way to dip your toe in the water. You're going to help them expand it even further.
Yeah. Whether you want to learn how to fundraise or become where you want to be in a consultant full-time, the conference will help you understand what that entails. We'll have an accounting person talk about, taxes and stuff. And we'll also have people just sharing their stories about how to deal with conflict as a consultant, which is also really important. Dr. Bev Browning will be speaking, and she is a legend.
Nice.
So I can't wait for her to speak.
That's awesome, Mazarine. All right, tell us the details again. Dates of the conference.
Sure. August 25th and 26th, 2022. This is our first year doing it. We may do it again next year, may not. If you're hearing this after the conference, we are going to sell the recordings until for 2 months afterwards. And the conference is at nonprofitconsultingconference.com. And awesome. If it's coming out in July, at the end of the month, the price is going to go up $100. So you definitely want to get in on that.
We'll have all the details in the show notes. Of course, before I let you go, Mazarine, a parting gift I ask of each guest, and you've already referenced a number of great books. Is there a particular book you might recommend to our listeners who are pondering leadership in the sector? Anything in particular come to mind that you would recommend? Maybe a book that's been meaningful to you?
Hmm. You know what? I honestly really like the book of essays called The Psychology of Executive Coaching.
Oh, wow.
And I really like it because it allows you to kind of see the different mental blocks people will have around you, whether you're looking to step into senior leadership, you're looking to move into nonprofits for the first time, or you're looking to consult. And I learned some things in that book that were just transformational for me into helping myself let go of solving certain personal problems for people. And that, that was wonderful. So I highly recommend that book.
Love it. Delighted to add that to a list of book recommendations that you and other experts on this show have added to our listeners list. So Mazarine, thank you. This has been fantastic. Where can
Thank
people
you,
find out
Patton.
more about you and the great work you're doing? Where do you want them to go?
Oh yeah, just go to mazarinetreyz.com. I'd love to chat if you're looking to make a transition. That's one of my favorite things to talk to people about. And you can certainly have a chat with me if you want to.
That's awesome. Mazarine, thanks again for joining me on the path.
Thank you, Patton.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mazarine as much as I did and came away with some new ideas that can guide your professional journey and maybe help you consider whatever kind of transition is up front for you in your near-term future. Don't forget the show notes are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. You can find out more about Mazarine, her consulting, her coaching, her training, as well as the virtual nonprofit consulting conference coming up August 25th and 26th, 2022. As always, thanks for sharing this episode with somebody else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you will see the follow button. And remember, follow equals subscribe. You can link to any of the primary podcast platforms. And don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. And if you like this episode, click on the episodes button at the top of the page and you can scroll through thumbnails of any of our best episodes. You can search as well by topic or guest name. Thanks as always for all that you do in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.